Next, from Springfield, we talked to Todd Vandermyde, a former lobbyist with the NRA of Illinois, now with the Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois. We talked to Mr. Vandermyde about current gun legislation circulating through the State House, as well as his thoughts on how to reduce gun violence in the aftermath of the Florida high school shooting. This runs about 15 minutes.
Todd Vandermyde, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois channel. People who watch us will know, until just recently, you had been lobbying for the NRA, and you're now with a different organization, but the point is you're probably the most expert person on gun issues, I think, in the Capitol, and I don't know that anyone would deny it. So we wanted to talk to you and update the audience with some of the issues that are passing through the legislature now, and obviously in the wake of the tragedy down in Florida. On the gun issues that are moving, what are they and where are they? Let's just lay that out first.
You start off with the state licensing of gun dealers, which is now on the governor's desk after having passed the House. You have the lethal violence order of protections, which has passed the Senate and come back over the House for a concurrence motion. You have a bill that would prohibit the sale of semi-automatic rifles, shotguns, to anybody under the age of 21. It would also ban the possession of all those firearms for anybody under the age of 21, which means it'll knock out junior shooting programs, puts a lot of other restraints on it. You've got a bill that would increase the waiting period on certain semi-automatic shotguns and rifles to 72 hours, the same as a handgun. You've got a bill out there about anonymous tip hotline against gun owners. So there's a magazine ban and body armor ban as well.
Obviously, a lot of people are screaming for some action to happen in the wake of the tragedy. In your estimation, would any of these bills impact the kind of school shooting or other shootings that we've seen around the nation?
No, because he passed the background check, he bought it at a retail store, so the failure here was not within the system as far as the gun laws go. The failure was in the response of government from the local school district all the way up to the FBI. There's the problem there. The magazine ban, they want to prohibit any magazine that holds more than 10 rounds. The Miami Herald is reporting that the magazines he used were just that. They held 10 rounds and he had multiple ones. It doesn't appear that he used body armor. You have a bigger issue where you had law enforcement on the scene who did have body armor, did have a firearm, and they chose not to go in. There's a report of at least one commander telling the officers not to go in, which seems to run counter to every tactic that's used by all major law enforcement groups today in an active shooter situation.
What would you say to those who say we ought to do something to protect the schools?
I think we should do something to protect the schools. We should sit there and harden the schools to make it harder for individuals to get in. I know that at my son's high school, there's a double set of doors. You have to get buzzed in both ways. It creates kind of that dead space like you see at certain jewelry stores and stuff like that. I think the classrooms need to be hardened. There are devices that teachers can throw over the door catches to make sure that they help, improve the door as a barricade. And I think that you need to have at least some discussion about whether or not it's appropriate to arm certain people on the school grounds so that there is an armed deterrence there. I mean, the fact is that if the gunman gets through all the outside security perimeters and layers, then the last line of defense is that teacher in the classroom.
One of the things that people often say is that we ought to have background checks on people. I believe you would argue, well, first of all, that there's some flaws in the system. Is that right? What are your thoughts on that, requiring background checks on gun purchases?
Well, at the retail level, we've had them there since 1992, when the NRA was instrumental in writing the NICS checks. We've had them here in Illinois since about 1992 with our FTIP system for retail sales. Back, about 10 years ago, they sat there and required them on all sales at gun shows, and then the state added all private transfers back about 5 years ago when they passed the carry law. Don't forget that Illinois also has a FOID card. So, and every night the state police run the FOID card list against the Criminal Records Index for new arrests and convictions. So, taking out the major holidays, the gun owners in Illinois have 360 background checks run on them every year, even before they buy a gun. So the question is, when is enough enough? If I have to have this special FOID card just so I can own a firearm, I get 360 background checks run against me every year, and I still have to wait 72 hours to purchase a firearm. I still have to, they don't want me to own certain firearms or magazines. When is enough enough?
I recently attended a speech where the head of the NRA was speaking and used a line that is often repeated, that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Is that true, or are there some other means that might offer protection?
Well, I think it's a good guy with a gun and some courage will be the ultimate last line of defense when you see government fail. I mean, what we're seeing right now is government failed at the school district level when they didn't report some of his actions to the police, and that whatever reason they expelled him for, they just kind of swept that under the rug. That when the state with DCFS missed all the warning signs that were there and just wrote it off. When 39 interactions with local law enforcement were not taken seriously. When 2 credible tips with his name were reported to the FBI, went uninvestigated, unheeded, and were just summarily dismissed. So background checks are only going to work as good as the information fed into the system is. There needs to be that, they always say, if you see something, say something. But if a citizen does that, then the government has to do something. They can't sit there and just act like it's no big deal.
And I understand something like 38 states are either not participating in the background check or just they're not loading up the kind of information they need for that background check to actually be as foolproof as I think people presume it to be.
Well, as we saw in one of the incidents, the individual had a domestic violence conviction within the armed forces, and that wasn't being reported. The system's only as good as the information that's fed into it. The old computer programming line of garbage in equals garbage out. You can't put it all on the gun owners, and we have to go through all these background checks if the system is not being fed the correct information.
When you talk to lawmakers, and before I go into that, let me correct something else. People will often say we shouldn't be selling automatic guns, and then we get into the discussion, what is an automatic gun, what's a semi-automatic gun, people wanting to get rid of the AR-15. Clarify these issues for us. Where are we on this whole issue of what is or isn't an automatic or a semi-automatic, and can you limit it by just eliminating one type of weapon?
Okay, so since 1934, fully automatic firearms, machine guns, have been regulated under the National Firearms Act. In 1986, the federal government put a cap on the number of those that are fully transferable and could be in the hands of civilians, somewhere around 186,000. Post 1986, any new mainly manufactured machine gun had to be for law enforcement or governmental use only. So that's the stat. There are about 30 states where it is legal for a private citizen to own one of those fully transferable full autos. A semi-automatic firearm differences itself because when you pull the trigger, you only get one shot per pull of the trigger. Therein lies the big difference. An AR-15 may look like an M16 or an M4 carbine, but it's different. It doesn't have a selector switch that allows for full auto fire.
If a semi-automatic is pull the trigger once and you get one shot, then isn't any weapon a semi-automatic?
Not necessarily, because a semi-auto uses either the gas from the bullet traveling down the barrel or the recoil to eject the spent shell casing and then rack the next one in to battery and set it up to fire. Lever guns require a manual manipulation. Pump shotguns require a manual manipulation. So bolt-action rifles require a manual manipulation of the firearms. So no, they're not all that way.
And before we go on too long, the other issue that we often hear, I think part of this is we don't even know what terminologies to use. So back when I was in D.C. covering the Congress, around 1996 or so, we had the assault weapons ban that was in effect for a while. What is an assault weapon, and how do we, if we're going to ban them, how do we identify what that is?
Well, the technical term actually refers to a select fire full auto machine gun. However, back in the early 90s, the anti-gunners started coining the phrase assault weapon, and they had a little memo out there, and their whole strategy was, if we can make the public think that these things that look like machine guns are in fact machine guns, if we can get that point across, it's a PR coup. And that's what their whole goal has been, is through this name, this misnomer, to try and fake out the public as far as what we're actually talking about. Because under the definitions that they often propose is that a lot of turkey hunting shotguns fall under that definition. A lot of target guns fall under that definition. A Ruger 1022 can fall under that definition.
And when you hear people say, as they often do, why can't we get rid of the AR-15? Why would anyone need an AR-15?
Well, it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. And an AR-15 is no different functionally than hundreds of other types of semi-auto firearms. And so it also happens to be the most popular modern sporting rifle in existence today. It's very modular for what you can do with it, for the size you can make it, the difference in accessories and stocks and sights and all that. They're great for everything from self-defense to hunting applications.
Relative to anything, and we'll wrap up here, but there's been a number of things. The president has laid out some issues. They've talked about the bump stock ban. Are there any areas where you could say, okay, we could go along with that action, and to what extent, if so, on those, would they have any impact?
Bump stocks that we know of have been used in one crime. I don't know that you're going to see an overall reduction if you were just to try to to regulate those in some way, shape, or manner. I mean, they don't have a serial number, so how are you going to track them? If we want to talk about getting at the root of some of these problems with mental health, I think there's room to work on a number of those issues. I think if you want to talk about how we staff up DCFS type agencies so that they can turn around and spot these warning signs, I really think that, from what you see consistently, these individuals, especially in the schools, are loners, outcasts, shunned. They're the little guys that are picked on by the jocks, the cheerleaders, whoever it is. They don't fit in any typical clique or group like we saw when we were in high school. And I think that some sort of mentoring program or something where it's like sit down and have lunch with the kid. Invite them over to play a game, spend time with these guys, sit there and let them know that they're not an outcast, and the bullying kind of thing. I think that's what goes to the heart of some of this, is that they're feel to made inadequate, they're feel to made that they're inferior, that they get picked on, they get bullied, that nobody wants to be their friend. And when they, when you're building that self-esteem and when they're in those formidable years, it can be pretty devastating at times. And I think we really need to spend some time and resources looking into those issues. My school that my sons go to has this code where character counts, and they have this, little pledge that they recite and all that. But those are only words if they're not acted upon.
All right, Todd Vandermyde, a lot of issues we covered in a short amount of time. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Terry. Glad to be back.